Hello, Laura, and welcome to Queerly Beloved. How are you today?
I am really good, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you and so excited to have this conversation. So, we're connecting through Zoom, and you are in Canada right now, is that right?
I am, yes, Toronto. Australian though, if you can hear the accent, so
I
not quite from
can.
here.
I love the Australian accent. I was I'm in an improv troupe, and we were playing this game where you kind of switch in the middle of your scene, different elements of the scene. And so one of the things that we were switching was dialects, and someone did an Australian accent, and I'm terrible at Australian accents, but without thinking, I jumped into it and I did it pretty good. I'm not gonna try and show you now because
Okay. Okay. I mean, I'm tempted. The Australian accent is a hard one to nail. There's varying degrees of the Crocodile Dundee type voice. So
yes,
I'm
exactly.
intrigued. I might hold it to you after we finish recording.
Okay, that's fair. But yeah, the trick was not thinking about it. But as soon as I jumped into it, now because I'd be thinking about it, I'd totally massacre it. So anyways, I'd love to start this interview with the question that I always start off with, which is, who are you in this moment? But tell me by describing the perfect drag avatar that embodies that.
Oh, gosh. So I actually love this question because my girlfriend was actually just doing a drag king performance a couple of months ago and really creating her identity. So it was kind of fun to do some playing around with her and some thinking about, well, like, who would I be? And I have an idea that I would be the gender fluid love child of Courtney Act, who's an amazing Australian drag queen. Yep, I can see you know her. And Patagonia, who's obviously very cool with climate justice, caring about the world. We've got vegan advocacy, we've got environmental advocacy. So somewhere in there, the slightly maybe masculine, gender fluid, figuring out her path, love child of the two.
Love it. And love those references to amazing queens. Patagonia, I discovered more recently, but I love what she's doing with her activism and then her looks, she rocks fabulous looks, but in nature. I love that.
I know. Have you seen that Lindsay Lohan clip? Because I love her. She is amazing. Yeah, that whole Lindsay Lohan ski scene from that holiday movie. Yeah, she's brilliant. Go check it out.
Okay, I love that. Great. Thank you for sharing that and for bringing in those beautiful references. I'll say for me, I was telling you I was riding my bike rapidly to get back on time for this interview because I forgot that I had ridden my bike to the coffee shop, and so I was on the clock, and I'm sort of still in that vibration of like, wee, is like I'm seeing like the Wizard of Oz, the witch in the Wizard of Oz riding her bike really quickly, but I'm not feeling like a evil witch. I'm feeling more like a fabulous spiritual witch who is just flying on her broomstick um past the sea, because I was riding on the coast with her. I'm wearing this like fabulous poncho, her poncho flying in the wind behind her, and on her way to connect with someone that I'm excited to highlight today. So I'm a fabulous witch
Yeah, you're
drag.
fierce and focused. I love it.
Yes, yes. Thank you for seeing me. Wonderful. So, yeah, I'm excited to hear about public love enterprises, and I would love for you to introduce your work around public love enterprises. And I was wondering if you could share perhaps how your queerness has shaped your founding of public love enterprises, and how that journey of queerness maybe has informed this incredible online school that you've created.
Oh, I like that question. It's an interesting one. And, the first thing that's kind of coming to mind is I think that, queerness has kind of shaped my sense of spirituality because queerness taught me at a very young age to learn how to orient towards what was whole and what was true and what was authentic and what didn't necessarily agree with cultural expectations or with family expectations. And so queerness was really that gift that taught me that there is another world, that there's another way, that things should feel good, things should feel pleasurable. And I don't just need to follow that standard life approach. And that's a lot of what, this school is based on. The idea of detoxing from capitalism, detoxing from patriarchy, from this idea of supremacy culture that dominates so much of our thoughts, dominates how we show up in the world. And so the mission of our school is to really help change makers to get free, dismantle internalized capitalism and patriarchy, to get power so we can make real change, and to find what is ours to do in this time. Now, I don't think I could have done any of this work or really had any of these thoughts if queerness hadn't kind of shaped me at such a young age.
Yeah, amazing. And what amazing work you're up to. Yeah, what is resonating for me in particular around that response is this piece around truth and how our queerness can really set us up to be a champion for truth. And for me, something that I'm present to right now in my spiritual journey is the importance of truth seeking. That part of being on a spiritual path is being committed to truth, the truth of all things. And so I'm curious if you have thoughts on how capitalism and the patriarchy can get in the way of truth.
Ooh, good question. I think it's not so much that they get in the way of truth, or they probably do. They get in the way of the truth of our authenticity, the truth of our wholeness, the truth of our connection. They're
Yes.
kind of barriers to all of that.
Mm,
But ultimately, they're stories of separation, and they're stories of domination, and they're stories of control.
mm,
Now, in your model of the world, that story might be true. I do think two things can be true at once, and we probably have two competing stories that, depending on which one you believe, we're experiencing them as truth.
mm,
What is our idea of truth? The definition that I'm using is really this idea of what feels pleasurable in our body, what feels good in our body, what feels kind of authentic and aligned to us. Because when we're still following any sort of thought or any sort of cultural expectation, or the idea that there's some ultimate truth that we can find and then just follow that one, and that's the be all and the end all, that there's one truth, I think is kind of problematic. So
mm.
there's definitely an illusion that they create. There's definitely a barrier that they create in those stories of separation.
Mm, yes, and the narrative that I often hear is, yeah, that there is the truth and that they know the truth, right? The patriarchy, the capitalist paradigm has the truth, and we are to abide by that truth. When what I'm hearing and what you're saying, in my opinion as well, is that we all have our own truths, and that there isn't one truth, that we each are responsible for connecting to and claiming our truths and finding our authenticity and our authentic understanding of the world and how it's occurring for us. And what I love too about what you're saying here is the wisdom of the body. There's something very aligned with queer spirituality when we talk about connecting with our body and connecting with our pleasure and finding our path towards truth through the body, through our pleasure, through what is actually life-giving to us. And yeah, I'd just love to hear more about your thoughts on what folks can do, or perhaps what you're doing in the school to help people dismantle some of the impacts of the patriarchy, of capitalism, again, that are getting in the way of this authenticity we're speaking of.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, first what actually internalized capitalism and internalized patriarchy actually are.
Yes.
So internalized capitalism is the equation of our worth with our productivity, or with what we produce.
Mm,
It is the toxic elements of capitalism that says that we always need to be infinitely growing, that we're never quite enough. The
mm,
artificial production of scarcity, capitalism's built around scarcity. And that devaluation of beautiful, living, complex systems, which is really what capitalism does. It takes an ocean, it takes a jungle, it takes a forest, and it says this doesn't have value like it is. It only has value when we extract something from it.
mm,
So it's taking those elements and they're playing it out in our psyches and in our relationships. So internalized capitalism looks like, going into work when we're sick, because we're overriding our body and what it needs. We have that sense of time scarcity because there's never enough time and we always need to be moving a little bit faster. And, how many of us have finished the weekend and gone, how was your weekend? It was great, but, it wasn't long enough.
mhm,
It's so built into what we do. That feeling of never quite being enough, never being good enough, never doing enough, never having enough. All of this is the internalization of capitalism and the internalization of the systems around us. Now, patriarchy is similar. It's a system of domination and it's a system of control. And it's
Before
saying that the
the,
rational,
the patriarchy, I just want to reflect a little bit on this internalized capitalism piece because it is so important and such a helpful framework. And it's funny because I was mentioning that I was at that coffee shop and then I was rushing back here. And what I was doing at that coffee shop was working on an e-blast that really is, I don't talk about internalized capitalism because I wasn't so aware of that framework, but essentially that's what this email was about. And it was about me discovering that I have had created a schedule for myself that was so busy and so rushed and really was motivated by this need to prove myself and to prove my worth and to feel like I was important. You know, when I would see this busy schedule full of, you know, board appointments and commitments to different communities and big epic trips, and these things would help me feel like, oh, I'm creating a successful life, I'm living a successful life, look at my
I
calendar.
matter.
Yes, I matter. Yes. And so it's really helpful to hear that framed with this internalized capitalism, that in many ways this is the product of what society, what our capitalist society has trained me to do and to believe in.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing. These problems aren't us. This is a problem with culture. We glorify being busy. We kind of see stress and burnout as like success symbols, right? That, if you're not stressed, are you really working hard enough? Because isn't that just a normal part of like being successful or being at the top or, like being in a certain position? Isn't this just what life and adulting is?
Mm.
And we have normalized stress to such an unnatural degree in our culture. And we have individualized it. We've said it's an individual problem. So if you're stressed and then you're not coping with being stressed, so
Mm.
you're like feeling overwhelmed and you're kind of getting sick all the time and you're not quite keeping up. Well, if you just like meditate like 5 more minutes a day, you can get everything that you're doing done with less stress and feel better. Just stop multitasking, right? We've made it all about you, but
Mm.
it's not you. And it's not us. It is the entire culture that we live in that is based on scarcity and that is based on this experience of never quite having enough. We've
Mm.
lost the ability to kind of know what satiety is, what enoughness feels like, what satisfaction feels like. I mean, you can see it in diet culture as well as burnout. It's the same kind of principle, right? That we override our body, we override what feels good in order to always be pursuing this external or mind-based validation.
Yes. The other piece to that is this need to do, constantly do. And it, goes back to what you were saying about and I'd invite you to share more about this extracting from the rainforest, for example, that the value comes from extracting it and instead of just it being the rainforest. And so there's a similar dynamic, I feel, that I've gotten over, I'm getting over, of my value isn't in the service that I provide on a board or the thing that I create as a result of these positions, but what my value is just me being. So it's really shifting from doing to being. And that's what I've been working on, is like really taking my sword to the obligations that were driven from this feeling a need to perform and produce and do, so that I can have more spaciousness to just be and to allow the inherent value of my beingness.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we don't really place our value in our relationships or in our beingness or, in what we have to offer in the moment. It's always in what we're doing. I
Mhm.
often talk about something, to kind of go back a bit about internalized extractivism. So, extractivism is this idea that in the world, we're often taking minerals and resources with very little regard for the surrounding environment, next to no regard for their renewal, and usually with like some toxic power dynamics at play because they're going from the global south to the global north and, all of the above that we can kind of see. But I think we treat our bodies in the same way. We treat ourselves the same way. We treat our inner resources like our creativity, our attention, our energy in exactly the same way, as if they'll always be there on demand, available whenever we want them. And so we extract our energy in this kind of linear line saying, it's fine. I can rest in 3 weeks when I have a vacation. It's fine. I've got that long weekend coming up when I can take the afternoon off and just feel guilty that I didn't clean the house or call my friend back or whatever it is I was supposed to do. Because we're always running and always on that treadmill. And
Mm.
so what all of this work is looking at the systems of the world and then looking at ourselves and how our lives and our relationships and our energy matches the systems. And
Mm.
how are we going to start getting free of those systems? By returning to what's true, by looking at our relationships, by returning to our body, and
Mm.
the kind of spiritual practices of stillness, of wholeness.
Oh.
One of my greatest practices that I kind of just want to touch on,
Mm.
it probably maybe it sounds a little bit weird. It's watching the birds. Like I live on the 27th floor. There's no nature here except birds. Like there are seagulls and pigeons. But I get to just watch them and just watch them soar. And it's a liberating experience to just watch them be. I think we can really benefit from that.
Oh my God, that speaks to my heart. I love watching birds. So I have a little balcony off my bedroom, and my favorite morning practice is just sitting out there and watching the birds. And I kind of go in and out of meditation, but then I'll like open my eyes and just notice a bird and notice another bird. And they tend to come out a lot more. It feels like it anyways, that they come out a lot more when I'm doing this activity, but I love it so much. And they're just such magnificent little creatures, and they connect us to this world of the sky. I love that. I love that you do that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes, watch the birds. It's a liberatory practice.
I used to live at a retreat center. I ran a LGBTQ retreat center in upstate New York, and got really into bird watching then too. And I would go on these hikes, and I'd have my little binoculars. And I remember one day, this one bird was just making the most beautiful sounds, and it was singing the just most beautiful song. And I lied down on the forest floor, and I just watched it with my binoculars, and it was like watching an opera, like watching this like soprano, and I was like crying, just like, oh my goddess, these amazing creatures just singing, like singing for us. It's so and singing for the world. It's so beautiful.
I
um
think we miss so much of that living in a city a lot of the time. Like we're so disconnected from nature that the few bits that remain, and birds being one of the big bits of wildlife that stay, we kind of just get so used to tuning it out, right? When it is so gorgeous to listen to. So I'm right there with you.
and forgetting that we are part of this bigger world. There's something that has been helpful for me, which is just like taking a moment and remembering that there's an elephant walking across the desert right now, or there's a tiger like moving through the woods, or through the forest somewhere. And just like sometimes taking a moment to remember that this isn't just this human world that we live in. And it happened once it was during a plant medicine ceremony that I just had this aha moment of like, there are like lions walking around somewhere on Earth right now. It's like, oh my goddess. So like I try to bring that in sometimes, to just remember that we are a small part of something much bigger.
Yeah, I mean, there are still tribes today, and very, very few of them, that haven't really even had contact with the Western world, with the world as we know it. Like, there's very few, and they're mostly in the Amazon deep, like kind of in Brazil, but they exist. People who have a radically different idea of the world, a radically different vision of how things work. Like, there are so many different ways to be human. There are so many different ways to be alive on this planet. And I think that that's such a powerful practice to kind of look at and return to. And you're right. There's a whale in the ocean just kind of wailing away right now. You
Yes,
know,
like a gigantic whale.
exactly. Just swimming along, just doing his thing.
Yeah.
And yet we're out here kind of like stressing, like, oh my God, I haven't quite done enough. I'm never going to keep up. Like, there's never enough time. I'm not good enough. Like,
Yeah.
all of these beliefs, like, something went seriously wrong with humans somewhere.
Mm.
And like, it's not us. It really is our systems and the way that they're playing out through us that I think is causing that and influencing that.
Yes. So why don't we switch now to I think we were touching on internalized capitalism, and now we go into the internalized patriarchy piece.
Yeah, so I mean, internalized patriarchy is really just this system of domination and control. It's, capitalism was kind of born out of patriarchy. It's a sibling to like white supremacy, it's very much related to all this kind of unholy trinity that exists. But patriarchy is, we're looking at this
Wait, what's unholy trinity? Sorry.
the patriarchy, white supremacy, and capitalism, the three big systems of oppression that we'll see kind of in the world today, or at least in the Western world. And there's others, like there's impacts of colonialism and ongoing, but
Hmm.
those three big cultural systems. And, when we're looking at patriarchy, we're looking at the rationalization of the mind over all of our emotions. We're looking at the way, we use domination and force as this idea of power. So to have power means we must have power over, right? It's not about embodied power. It's not about shared power. It's not about collective power. It's power over.
Hmm.
It's a very, is a way that we don't really value visioning and imagination and creativity, because we're all about rationality and our mind and what is the right response. So there's a lot of ways that we've kind of internalized this sense of hierarchy, both within ourselves and how we treat our emotions, how we treat our body. Part of that disconnection from our body is because we're always living up here, very neck up. We're only putting value on our mind and our thoughts.
Hmm.
And we're also using it in our relationships. So we're often seeing hierarchy, in our offices, which is a very common one. We're seeing it in our marriages. We're seeing it in our friendships. Like
Hmm.
sometimes this competitiveness is there. So where is the paradigm of domination, which is what patriarchy is,
Hmm.
playing into our relationships, into our thoughts, and into our habits? And I think that's a powerful question to start to unpack.
Yes, I think that's super valuable. So going back to this Holy Trinity piece, firstly, I wonder if there's a different name for it.
I said unholy, not
Oh,
holy.
love that.
Unholy.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Important correction. And then this we'll see where this goes, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on if we were to really dismantle the unholy trinity and start to envision what a new holy trinity might look like, what do you think we could create? What could be some like tenets that hold us instead of colonialism, white supremacy? Oh, I think I added extras. Capitalism and patriarchy.
Ooh. Well, I mean, I think two of them have got to be love and solidarity, right?
Yes. Okay.
Like,
I got two.
there's a reason I called my business Public Love Enterprises, and it's because I think love is a really revolutionary force for transformation. I think love holds more power than, we actually give it credit for. And we talk about it as if it's just this romantic thing and it's kind of nice to have and it's a little bit fluffy. But, love can be a really robust principle to work with. Many of the nonviolence programs or philosophies of the past that underpinned everything from the civil rights movement to the suffragettes were based on this idea of love. you
Mm,
know and so how are we going to use love in our public spaces? How are we going to look at love as a public good? What would love look like in our politics? And I think these are powerful questions, so love would have to be one of them. And knowing love doesn't mean that you always agree. Love doesn't mean tolerance. Love doesn't mean putting up with unacceptable behavior. I think love rises, love stands up, love has boundaries, love knows accountability,
mm,
but there's still love. And I think solidarity or community or connection would have to be one of the other pieces, like that we are all connected. Everything on this planet, whether we're looking at ecosystems and, the interconnection of species, and, as soon as you mess with one, the entire system goes out of whack, right? You can't just, we know this now, we can't just like introduce one invasive species and expect everything else to do wonderfully well. We can see the interconnection with each other, that what is happening in Brazil actually affects us here. What happens in the climate in Australia will be affecting us over here. We are one world.
mm.
Now, as for the third piece, I probably have to think on this one, because those are the two that are coming straight to me. But I love this question, and I'm going to let it kind of formulate in the back of my mind and see if it can come to me over the next little bit. Or I'd love to know what you think.
Well, I love the ones that you already came up with. And yeah, I mean, I feel like a bird just flew up to join us in this interview. Maybe you heard us talking about our love for birds. But what I heard in the solidarity piece was the this recognition of the interconnectedness of all that is. And perhaps there's something around mindfulness too, right? So it's having that awareness of the interconnectedness of all that is, having maybe there's something around just awareness. It feels like, and maybe that also could circle back to the word truth. So maybe truth is a piece of it, is love, solidarity, or interconnectedness and truth.
I like that. And
Mm.
remembering, two things can be true at once.
Mm.
Truth is subjective, but I do like that. I think, I'm really curious, like, what does truth mean to you?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And again, it's important for me to note that I don't believe in the truth. I believe that I have a truth and you have a truth and we all have truths. And I believe that we often are misled and we are hiding from our own truths. And so for me, truth is about getting past all the things that block us from this inner knowing, from this deep understanding and consciousness of what is. And I'm like hesitating because I keep wanting to say the word true, but what is real for us, what is alive for us, outside of what we've been told is real for us, what is alive for us, what is true for us, right? And really finding the capacity to, I think it's often tapping into our hearts to ask that question, and listening to our hearts, our bodies, our spirit, not just subscribing to what we've been told. That would be some of my thoughts on truth.
Yeah, I love that definition. And I what you're kind of saying there about what is alive for us, what are we actually experiencing? That kind of awareness of that. So I think that's beautiful. And with that, I think truth is kind of that third pillar there.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And something we can keep playing with. But yeah, that's really fun. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you were inspired to create this. Like, what was your path to, and something that I often have conversations with my clients about as a coach is purpose, and about finding your dharma and connecting to your dharma. And as we have this conversation and as I've researched your work, I just see you as such a perfect champion for this kind of framework and mission. And it's a big mission. I mean, it's very high stakes and a lot of work to be done. And it's really inspiring when I see someone so well matched with their work. And to me, it's a indication of someone who has done that hard work and dug deep to find what they are truly called to do in this world. And so I'm inspired to hear you share anything about your path to discovering your purpose, discovering your dharma.
Oh gosh. I mean, firstly, thank you. That is so lovely to hear.
Mm.
There's a few things to probably touch on here. I think, there's a few spaces that kind of led me to this. One, just to kind of say up front, I am deeply driven by this work, and I take on such a big mission and I try to make it big because I think in the age of climate change, we don't have a choice. I think we need to act now. We need to radically reimagine the world, or there isn't going to be a world that we can really want to be a part of in 100 or 200 years from now. So now is the time. If there was ever a time, it's now.
Mm.
But, I've always been somebody who I think had an interest in purpose. I grew up in a house really surrounded by spirituality and personal development. My mother was a life coach and trained life coaches back like 30 years ago,
Wow.
when I was pretty early in Australia.
Mm.
And, some of my earliest memories are being in the car listening to everyone from Neil Donald Walsh to Dennis Waitley to Tony Robbins to Wayne Dyer, and like all
Cool.
these like very interesting thinkers that I think taught me from a young age that I have a sense of agency and that I have a sense of choice, and that purpose is always something to look to. So it was never like I grew up and then it was like, oh, purpose, like why is that missing? It was always like from a very young age thinking about purpose.
Mm.
But I also think I've done this work because I've struggled a lot in my life with depression, with anxiety, with mental health issues, with feeling not good enough, with perfectionism. So a lot of what I teach is also things that I have been through, that I have had to do this work of getting to know myself. I've had to do this work of going within, of learning to use my self-work to better myself, to enjoy my life, to kind of free myself from the shackles with which I was kind of chained. All the little voices that said, you're not good enough the way you are, you need to be better, or, you're separate from this. And so the more I learned to do that self-work, and there were many different paths I took in that, the more I learned to really then connect it to world work, to connect it to activism, to connect it to broader systems, because as much as I benefited from that work growing up and being exposed to coaching from a young age and being exposed to personal development, I also saw the limitations of that work. And that is, it very often has a singular lens inward and not outward, that it focuses on, our own enlightenment, kind of forgetting about this idea of collective liberation, that sometimes it's like very capitalistic in disguise. I think capitalism has rolled a lot of it into it, particularly when you look at teachings of, manifestation, or you can have what you want. And when we're teaching, you can do anything you want in the world without also looking at the climate crisis, without also looking at biodiversity loss, without also looking at the ongoing suffering that so many people face, that's capitalism. So seeing these kind of bridges really inspired me to do this work now, to teach change makers to do self-work, to look at self-work for world work, to see kind of how we could bridge inner and outer transformation and what they may have to offer each other.
Wow. First of all, how cool that you were raised by a coach back in the day. I don't think I've really met any adults who were raised by a life coach. That's a really fabulous and
Yes.
experience. And I love that it had a profound impact on you. And I also am really intrigued by this idea of giving folks who are activists, who are change makers, more access to these tools of inner work. And then what I think I'm hearing you say too is to invite folks who are really committed to the inner work to also be considering the outer work. I feel like those are such important pieces of the puzzle that are often missed. And because I talk so much about inner work on this podcast, and so many of my listeners are committed to their inner work, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about how we can do our inner work within the context of the challenges that the world is facing, so we can do it in a more mindful way, so we can do it in a way that isn't spiritual bypassing, so we can do it in a way where it's not, I don't know what I'm feeling called to like state a lot of negative judgments about it, but it could be narcissistic, it could be selfish. Like some of the work, especially when you're talking about, manifestation work of like, I can have a new Mercedes and a mansion and a private jet. And it's like, yes, okay, great. Go do your witch thing and manifest those things. But what about how those things are impacting our climate? So I'm just curious to hear how people might navigate that, in your opinion.
Oh gosh, I mean, I love this question. It's also such a big question, right? Because there's so many like different teachings that we could look at. I think when we're talking about manifestation, and that kind of create the life that you want, I think it's important to know there's nothing wrong with like loving your life. Sometimes the kind of world work or activisty side feels a little bit scarce. Like you kind of just got to struggle. You got to like, just be getting by, and everything you've got to fight for. And, you can't have any nice things if you care about the climate. And I really don't believe that. I think, when we're talking like private jets and things, that's a totally different story, right? I think, okay, we probably actually should get rid of them. But when we're looking at, well, what does a flourishing life mean? What does a thriving life mean? And most of the time, it doesn't mean the things we've been taught that it means. It's not about these external validations. It's not just about having the nice car, about having the nice house, about having the flashy clothes. It's not even about reaching that certain career level. It is about, the kind of intrinsic motivations that we have. So where is our sense of purpose? And all of us will have a different sense of purpose. All of us, like, there are so many aspects of the world that needs remaking. So like all of us needs to be following our thing, not just finding the thing, but our thing. Where is our purpose in this? I think every single one of us has a calling. Where is our relationships? in the quality of our relationships. Because again, if we're not kind of building that depth of relationship in our communities, in our relationships, in our families, then how do we expect to actually have peace or harmony anywhere else?
Mm,
How are we looking at, do we feel good? Do we actually have fun? We undervalue fun in our culture. We deserve way more fun than we actually have. So I
mm,
think it's about shifting our priorities away from, enlightenment is just about you, away from you can have everything you want and that means only material items,
mm,
towards this idea of, well, what actually makes you happy? Where is your sense of community? Where is your sense of well-being? Where is your sense of purpose? And if you are following those things, usually they lead you outwards into the world. If
mm,
those community, well-being, and purpose are not leading you outwards into the world, I would question that. I would say actually maybe something is not entirely right there. And maybe there's a space actually to explore, because that's where most of us are called, right?
mm,
Let's take it into the world. Let's go meet new people. Let's build a business. Let's build a community. Let's offer something to people. And then lastly, I think the most important thing, spirituality is about love. My idea of God is as an energy and as love. So if we are not underpinning our spiritual work with the idea of love for ourselves, for others, for the natural world,
mm,
then I think that's a missing piece as well.
beautiful. Yeah, something that popped up for me when you were sharing that is this deepening of the work, right? And what I find sometimes is my clients come to me with these very external goals or aspirations. And sometimes it's so freeing when we do that deepening process, right? So the idea of like, oh, I want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, great. We can work on that. But what is it that you really want? And when we get down to it, it's like, I want to feel fit. I want to feel confident. I want to have energy. And it's like, yes, maybe losing 30 pounds is a byproduct of that, but that's not actually the deeper goal, right? And so helping folks identify what it is that they're truly looking to manifest. So if it's a private jet, what is it really? Perhaps it's abundance, perhaps it's a feeling of freedom, and the private jet maybe isn't necessary for
Yeah.
those things. Hmm.
Or a feeling of, belonging, or a feeling of, what, actually I'm enough. Because
Yes.
again, how much of our insatiable need to always be having more is driven by this scarcity, is driven by I'm never enough and I can never have enough, because that's why we want the private jet. So everyone looks at us and says, you've made it. You're there. Like, look at this. You never have to fly in first class on a commercial jet ever again. So,
Yeah, so
you
much of
know,
it is about proving oneself, or yeah, proving
exactly.
value. Hmm.
And so when we can take the pressure of having to prove ourselves, and we can actually do exactly what you're saying, which is get to the root of what it is that we actually want to experience, which very often is, connection, belonging, love, worthiness, then those are very attainable experiences. And those are the things that really matter. And they're the things that the more of us who start to really connect to them, I think start to reshape our world.
How has spirituality helped you in your personal journey connect with some of those things?
Mm. I think spirituality, for me, and I'm trying to think about, how do I define spirituality?
Mm,
And for me, I think it's about connecting to something larger than myself, and so I have practices that help me do that. And that's things like meditation. Plant medicine's been part of my journey. I think I even consider travel for me to be a spiritual experience, because it really connects me to the world and to something larger than myself.
yes.
And so if I think about how that has helped me, it's immensely.
Mm,
Like, I think about when I was, 20 years ago, and I was full of rage and so angry and, so sad and mad at the world. There
mm,
was no connection to anything larger than myself. And when I finally started to really experience that, after a lot of work and after a lot of emotional processing,
mm,
that was an experience that was freeing, that was took this weight off my shoulders, that realizing that there is a world bigger than me. And that it's not like that's a bad thing, that's actually a beautiful thing, because I get to be a part of that. So
mm,
there's a few different ways, but I definitely think that connection to something larger has always been this guiding principle in my life,
mm.
or at
Yeah,
least since I was about 20 and started to really do this work.
nice. Beautiful. Yeah, it occurs to me that with how big your mission is, and actually I'd love for you to share what you consider your mission to be with your work. Let's start there, and then I'll ask the next question. What do you consider your mission, the mission of Public Love Enterprises, or and in general the work you're doing in the
Yeah.
world?
I want to help create the conditions for social healing and collective thriving, for liberation. I think that healing and thriving occur naturally when the conditions are there. We
Mm,
don't force them, we don't make it. They occur when the right conditions are there. Just like when we're looking at a beautiful plant, when it has the right sunlight, the right soil, the right nutrients, it thrives naturally. So too do we. So
mm,
I want to help create those conditions.
mm.
And yeah, look at that idea of collective liberation.
And what are some of those conditions? What are the things that support folks to be in that space?
I think, oh gosh, I love that question.
Mm,
I think connection is one. And that
yes.
starts with connection to our body, right? That's been such a big entry point for myself and for so many others. Connection to our body and to what our emotions are and to what we really feel and what we really want. Like starting literally with just connecting to ourselves.
Mm,
From there we can start to look at connecting to others, to connecting to community, to a wider sense of purpose. But I think that fundamental principle of stillness, listening, like hearing that truth, as you were talking about before, our truth, and
mm,
following that, that leads us there.
mm.
That is one of the conditions that we need, because if we're not doing that, then it's very difficult because we're always somewhere else.
Yeah, perhaps this circles us back to the new Holy Trinity: love, solidarity, and truth. And so in the face of a world with conditions that are not very conducive to a collective liberation, how do you stand in your resilience? How are you able to, you mentioned that in your 20s you were full of rage and hating the world. And it occurs to me, with that mission, which is beautiful, by the way, and epic, I'm curious how it is for you when perhaps turn on the news and see some of the crap that's going on, and navigate through this world that is so immersed in the unholy Trinity. How are
Oh
you
God,
able?
it's so depressing, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
turn on the news and it's like, oh, okay, great.
Oh.
Um, So I think there's a few things to this. One, there are practical things I could talk about. Like I actually, I have balance. I very much like stay up to date, consume the news, but sometimes also like when that's not good for my mental health, when that's really not helping me show up the way I want to, then I have balance there and I kind of take a step back.
Mhm.
I think it's really important to have practices like looking for the good, like actively looking for it, because there is so much good in the world, but you will not find it on the nightly news. You will not find it on the New York Times or the Guardian or even like those beautiful papers that are out there. So we need to look for those stories and we need to look for them in our community and be part of actually creating them. But I also think, it comes back to this idea. I really believe that revolution is both like an inside and an outside job. That as much as we need activists in the streets, and that's something I've been a part of and I absolutely support that, we also need to do this work of going within, and there are so many of us who are willing to do that. And so when we can do and create and believe in that vision of enough of us really reconsidering our lives, re-looking at our communities, then it's kind of, I don't know, it gives me hope. It's
Mm,
very easy to look at the world and see that it's depressing, but I think it's a practice to look at it and to look for hope and to believe that another world is possible, to have hope for another world and to actively try to make it so. Because the moment we believe it's not, the moment we stop working towards it, I mean, the world stays as it is. And the power structures that benefit from the world as it is have a lot invested in that story. There is a lot invested in the story of our powerlessness, the story of our helplessness, the story of our separation and individuation. And so I actually really believe it's an act of rebellion and it's an act of love to kind of not believe that, to try and look for what is good, as well as kind of staying aware of all of the problems.
yes, holding that dichotomy. Yeah, and I similarly feel that this self work and this community work, it can help us when we're feeling overwhelmed by the bigness of what we're up against, to keep coming back to, well, it starts here, it starts inside us, and then it starts in our communities. And if enough of us are starting here and in our communities, things are going to change on a more global scale. And it's not on us to be trying to fix things from this top-down approach, right? From the approach that patriarchy has dominated us. We're not actually charged with coming and saying, no, strike all this, we can't do it this way, we have to do it this way. Because that would be following the same paradigm as our patriarchy oppressors. Rather, it's a inside out job. Instead of it being from above and down, it's from inside out, is really some of the wisdom that I'm getting from this conversation. And that feels hopeful, and that feels more manageable, more doable, and less overwhelming.
I think you just reminded me of an experience I had in a yoga class of all places years
Mhm.
ago, when I was really kind of just struggling with a few things in my life. My sister was unwell. Like there were, it felt like this need to like look after my mother, and all of these things were happening. And I remember this voice that came over me that said that, it is not your job to fix the world, it is your job to love it.
Ooh.
And I think that's been a really powerful teaching for me, right? Because I can't fix the world. I can't save it. I'm not even trying, because I think as soon as I'm using that energy of saving and fixing, I'm
Mm.
burning myself out. I'm getting stressed. I'm playing into that whole power dynamic of me versus them and David versus Goliath and everything. But if you ask me, can I love the world? Absolutely, I can. And that has a very different energy, and it has a very different set of possibilities that come from it. Like my actions are going to be different. And it is something that I can show up from every day that is not the energy of fixing or saving. And
Mm.
that's such a distinction, I think, for us to have.
That's so helpful. Yeah, going back to the first of the holy trinities of love, and starting with, again, inside out, loving ourselves, loving the people in our lives, loving the world, and knowing that love is, well, for me, my perspective is love is the truth, love is God, love is all that is. And so it is an energy that we can connect to if and when we open ourselves to it and remove the blocks that are getting in the way of it. So I love that invitation. Thank you so much. Oh, wow. This has been so exciting, beyond what I expected. And I already had high hopes, but this was beyond. So thank you for all the wisdom you've dropped so far. Any final words you want to share with the listeners as we conclude our time together?
Oh, I think maybe something that was just coming to me is that, what we were talking about before, you've mentioned a couple of times that I had this big vision, and it's true. But I think we think far too small as a world. I think we greatly underestimate the impact that we can have. And so, any message that I would have is like, think bigger, dream bigger. Like there is no harm in going big in this time. So like figure out what your purpose is, and then yeah, like exponentialize it. Why not? Shoot for the moon. So that's my message.
Yes, shoot for the moon. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And congratulations on all the beautiful work you're doing, and my blessings to it to continue to thrive and flourish and grow and help liberate this world.
Amazing. Thank you again for having me on and for the conversation today. I so appreciate it.